Will I see you again?
The first time Carol Whitfield held her granddaughter. The baby was 3 days old and already forgotten by the one person who was supposed to love her most. Her daughter, Melissa, was unconscious in a hospital bed 2 floors below. Not from the birth, but from the pills. Carol stood in that NICU hallway under fluorescent lights, a swaddled infant pressed against her chest, and made a decision that would cost her everything she had left to give. She didn't know it yet. She thought it would be temporary. They always think it will be temporary. But 6 years later, Carol Whitfield would find herself sitting in a courthouse, trembling, watching a judge hand her grandchildren. The children she had bathed and fed and rocked through nightmares and walked to school and kissed goodnight for 2,190 consecutive days. Back to the woman who had abandoned them before they could even say the word mama. And that woman would walk out of that courthouse without once looking back. Not even at Carol. Not even a glance. If you have ever loved a child that wasn't legally yours, if you have ever been the one who showed up when someone else couldn't, stay with me through this entire story. Because what happened to Carol Whitfield is happening to grandmothers all across this country right now, and almost nobody is talking about it. Hit subscribe before we go any further, because this is exactly the kind of story we tell here at Fireside Tales. Real, raw, and impossible to forget. And trust me, you are going to want to be here for what comes next. Here is what nobody tells you about loving someone else's children. Nobody tells you that you can pour every last drop of yourself into 2 small human beings, your savings, your sleep, your health, your plans, your future, and still have no legal right to them whatsoever. Nobody tells you that love, no matter how deep or how long or how selfless, means absolutely nothing when a biological parent decides they want their life back. Nobody warns you that you can be erased. Carol was 61 years old when she first took in her grandchildren. She had worked 33 years as a dental hygienist in Dayton, Ohio. She had a modest house on Elmwood Drive with a garden out back and a retirement account she had been quietly, carefully building since her 40s. She had plans, nothing extravagant, just the kind of quiet dreams a woman allows herself after a life of responsibility. A trip to Savannah. More mornings with coffee and a good book. Maybe a little dog. She had a life. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, her phone rang. Melissa had relapsed again. The children, Emma, who was 4, and Tyler, who had just turned 2, were at the apartment alone. A neighbor had heard crying through the walls for most of the day and finally called someone. Carol was the someone they called. She drove 40 minutes with her heart in her throat and walked into an apartment that smelled of cigarette smoke and neglect. Tyler was in his crib, screaming, his diaper so soaked it had leaked through to the mattress. Emma was sitting on the kitchen floor eating dry cereal out of the box, still in her pajamas from the day before, watching the door like she had been watching it for hours, waiting for someone, anyone, to come. She looked up at Carol and said, very quietly, "Grandma, I didn't know who to call." She was 4 years old. Carol loaded them into her car without saying a word. She didn't cry until she got home. She didn't sleep that night. And by morning, she had cleared out her sewing room to make a bedroom for Emma and set Tyler's old crib up in the corner. She filed for emergency guardianship the following week. Melissa entered her 3rd rehabilitation program that November. She called sometimes, sporadic, tearful calls that went nowhere. And Carol always answered, always kept her voice steady, always said the same thing, "Get better, just get better. We'll be here." Because that was the kind of woman Carol was. She did not give up on people. She had not given up on Melissa through the first relapse, or the second, or the arrest, or the lost jobs, or the broken leases, or the years of chaos that had quietly swallowed her daughter whole. She kept a candle lit, metaphorically speaking, for the girl she remembered, the one who used to sit on the kitchen counter and eat cookie dough and talk about becoming a veterinarian. That girl was still in there somewhere, Carol believed. She had to believe it. But believing in Melissa's recovery and raising 2 traumatized children were 2 entirely different things happening in the same exhausted body. Emma had night terrors. Violent, gasping, inconsolable episodes that could last an hour. Carol learned to sit beside her in the dark without touching her. Because touch in those first months made it worse, and just talk in a low, even voice until the child found her way back. Tyler had speech delays and a flinching quality that broke Carol's heart every single time he startled at a raised voice or a slammed cabinet door. He had learned very early that loud sounds meant something bad was coming. Carol took them to therapy. She took them to pediatricians and speech pathologists and school enrollment offices. She learned the language of trauma-informed care at 61 years old, sitting in waiting rooms with pamphlets, determined to understand everything so she could do it right. She went back to work part-time because the retirement account was shrinking. She sold a piece of land she had been holding on to for years, a small plot she had inherited from her own mother, something she had always thought of as a little security blanket against the unknown. Gone. Because Tyler needed occupational therapy and the insurance didn't cover everything and children need things, endlessly the way children do, her friends stopped calling as much. There were no more impromptu dinners or weekend trips or long phone calls on Friday nights. Carol was always tired. Carol was always needed. Carol's world had contracted down to Elmwood Drive and the two small people who lived there with her, and she did not complain about it. She chose this. She would choose it again. Emma started kindergarten. Tyler learned to read early and became obsessed with dinosaurs. Carol put a dinosaur border up in their room, the sticky kind you peel and press, and he stood in front of it every morning before school pointing at each one and telling her the names. Stegosaurus, Triceratops, Ankylosaurus. He said Ankylosaurus with perfect clarity long before he could pronounce some simpler words, and Carol thought that was the funniest, most wonderful thing. She photographed everything. Birthdays and loose teeth and first days of school and Tyler's face the morning it snowed for the first time, and he pressed his nose against the window glass in disbelief. She kept albums. She kept everything. Because she understood, somewhere in the back of her mind she never fully examined, that she might need proof someday that this had been real, that she had been here, that she had mattered. Melissa was doing better. That was genuinely true, and Carol genuinely wanted to celebrate it. 2 years into her sobriety, real sobriety this time with a sponsor and meetings and a therapist and a sober living house, Melissa started calling more regularly. She started asking more specific questions about the kids. What Tyler was reading, whether Emma had made a best friend yet, what size shoes they wore. Carol answered every question. She was not guarded. She had no reason to be guarded. This was her daughter. This was what she had prayed for. She drove the children to see Melissa for supervised visits every other weekend, 2 hours each time, at a community center in a neutral part of town. She sat in the parking lot and read novels and prayed quietly and did not allow herself to feel threatened by the fact that Emma came out of those visits a little bit distant, a little bit somewhere else, the way children get when their emotional world has been stirred. She told herself Melissa's recovery was the goal. She told herself family reunification was healthy. She told herself she was doing the right thing. She was. That's the part that makes this so cruel. By Melissa's 3rd year of sobriety, the visits had expanded. Overnight stays, then full weekends. Carol watched the children pack their backpacks on Friday afternoons with a feeling she could not entirely name. Not jealousy, she told herself. Not fear. Just a low, persistent hum in her chest that she pushed down because this was supposed to be good news. This was supposed to be the happy ending. She did not know that Melissa had already hired an attorney. She found out on a Wednesday morning in March. A letter arrived from a family law office. Formal, correct, impossible to misunderstand. Melissa was filing for full custody of Emma and Tyler, termination of the guardianship arrangement, and this was the part Carol read 3 times before it registered. She was requesting that any future contact between Carol and the children be at Melissa's sole discretion. Sole discretion. Carol sat at her kitchen table for a long time after reading that. The coffee went cold. Outside, a cardinal landed on the fence post by the garden and sat there for a moment, red and bright against the gray March sky, and then flew away. She called a family attorney that afternoon. The news was not good. The law in Ohio and in most states does not treat grandparents the way grandparents perhaps deserve to be treated. Biological parents hold primary rights. A parent who has completed rehabilitation, maintained sobriety, and demonstrated stability presents a compelling case to any family court. Carol's guardianship, while loving and thorough and life-saving, did not automatically entitle her to continued contact once the biological parent was deemed fit. She had done everything right. She had raised those children beautifully, and it might not matter. The custody hearing lasted 3 days. Carol sat at her table with an attorney who was good but not optimistic. Melissa sat at the opposite table looking composed and purposeful in a gray blazer, her sobriety documented in certificates and letters and affidavits. She had a job. She had an apartment. She had 3 years of clean drug tests. She also had, sitting beside her attorney, a declaration stating that prolonged separation from a biological parent was harmful to children's development and that reintegration should proceed with the child's primary home being the parent's residence. Carol's attorney called her to the stand. She spoke about the night terrors and the speech therapy and the dinosaur border on the wall and the cookie Tyler had insisted on decorating himself last Christmas even though the icing went everywhere. She spoke about 6 years of breakfast and homework and skinned knees and stomach bugs and recitals and parent-teacher conferences and every ordinary extraordinary day of those children's lives. She did not cry on the stand. She had promised herself she would not cry on the stand. She cried in the parking garage afterward, alone in her car, for 45 minutes. The judge ruled in Melissa's favor. Full custody. Effective in 30 days. Carol was granted, as though it were a gift someone was graciously choosing to give her, 2 supervised visits per year. 2. The rest was left to Melissa's discretion. Tyler was 7. Emma was 9. They had lived in Carol's house for 6 years. 6 years is longer than Emma had been alive when she first came to her grandmother's kitchen floor. It was Tyler's entire conscious memory of the world. 30 days later, on a Saturday morning, Melissa arrived at the house on Elmwood Drive with a minivan and a woman Carol didn't recognize. She waited on the porch while Carol and the children said goodbye inside. Emma held on for a long time. She pressed her face into Carol's shoulder and Carol felt the wet of her tears through the fabric of her blouse. And she held that child as steady and calm as she could, stroking her hair, whispering, "I love you. I will always love you. Nothing changes that. Nothing." Tyler would not let go of her hand. She had to physically, gently, uncurl his fingers. He did not cry. He just looked at her with those enormous dark eyes, his dinosaur backpack on his shoulders, and said, "Will you remember which ones are my favorites?" She told him yes. She told him she would remember everything. She stood on the porch and watched the minivan pull out of the driveway. Melissa was in the passenger seat. She did not look at Carol. Not once. Not a glance in the side mirror. Not a raised hand. Nothing. The minivan turned at the end of Elmwood Drive and disappeared. Carol stood on that porch for a long time after it was gone. The house was quiet in a way it had not been in 6 years. The dinosaur border was still on the bedroom wall. Tyler's library books were still stacked on the nightstand. She had forgotten to pack them, and now she didn't know how to get them to him. Emma's drawing of the 2 of them, crayon on construction paper, both figures with enormous smiles and yellow hair, was still taped to the refrigerator with a strawberry magnet. Carol left it there. She left all of it there for weeks, because taking it down felt like admitting something she was not ready to admit. In the months that followed, she wrote letters. She sent cards on birthdays and holidays, addressed to Melissa's apartment, because she had no other way to reach the children. She did not know if they were received. She did not know if they were read. She did not know if Tyler still talked about dinosaurs or if Emma had found that best friend yet. She did not know the things that grandmothers are supposed to know. She requested the 2 supervised visits she had been granted. The first one happened 4 months later, at a family services office with a social worker present, for 2 hours. Emma talked fast and bright and performatively cheerful in the way children do when they are managing 2 worlds at once. Tyler sat close to Carol and didn't say much but kept his hand on her arm the whole time, just resting there, like making sure she was real. She held it together through the whole visit. She smiled. She asked questions. She laughed at the right moments. She fell apart in the car afterward. The second visit was canceled by Melissa's attorney. Scheduling conflict. The reschedule took 4 more months to arrange. This is what erasure looks like when it happens slowly. It doesn't come all at once. It comes in delayed callbacks and rescheduled visits and letters that are never acknowledged, and children who get a little more distant each time because time does that to people, even when love doesn't change. It comes in the form of legal documents and sole discretion and the quiet administrative fact that you are no longer someone's guardian, you are no longer someone's emergency contact, you are no longer, as far as the relevant paperwork is concerned, anyone at all. Carol Whitfield retired the following spring. She took that trip to Savannah. She walked along the waterfront and ate at a nice restaurant and sat in Forsyth Park under the Spanish moss and thought about everything and nothing. She sent a postcard to Melissa's address with a picture of the fountain and wrote nothing on it except her phone number and the words, "I'm still here. I always will be." She does not know if Melissa showed it to the children. She keeps the albums. All of them. The birthdays, the first days of school, Tyler's face against the snow window, Emma's gap-toothed smile from when she lost her first tooth during dinner and cried and then laughed. Carol still has all of it. She still has the crayon drawing on the refrigerator. She is still the woman who showed up on that October afternoon 6 years ago when no one else did, who drove 40 minutes and walked into a smoke-filled apartment and found a 4-year-old girl on the kitchen floor who didn't know who to call. She answered. She has always answered. And if those children ever look for her, if Emma, 15 years from now, wonders about the woman who held her through the nightmares, or if Tyler, grown and curious about the years before he fully understood them, goes looking for the grandmother who knew every one of his favorite dinosaurs by name, she will be there. She will have kept everything. She will answer. There is a question that lingers in cases like Carol's, and it does not have a clean answer. We celebrate recovery. We should. Sobriety is hard, and earned, and real. But recovery from addiction does not erase the years when someone else stepped in to love the people you couldn't care for. The law, in its bluntness, treats parenthood as a status that can be recovered. It is less equipped to reckon with what caretaking costs the people who do it, the retirement accounts and the sleep and the plans and the years and the health and the quiet futures that were given freely to children who needed them. What does Carol Whitfield owe Melissa? Perhaps forgiveness. Perhaps continued goodwill. Perhaps the grace of not speaking bitterly about her daughter to 2 children who love them both. She has given all of those things. What does Melissa owe Carol? That is a question only Melissa can answer. And so far, she has chosen silence. Was justice served here? The law would say yes. Parent recovered. A family was reunified. The system worked as designed. But sit with that for a moment. Sit with Emma on the kitchen floor in her yesterday pajamas, waiting. Sit with Tyler's hand resting on Carol's arm in a supervised visitation room because touch is how he makes sure things are real. Sit with a woman on a porch watching a minivan disappear, holding herself very still, not because she isn't breaking but because breaking would not be useful right now. And ask yourself, if you had been Carol, would you have done anything differently? And if you had been Melissa, even understanding her recovery, even honoring it, could you have driven away without looking back? Drop your answer in the comments. Let us know where you are watching from. This is exactly the kind of story where your perspective matters, because there are women watching right now who are living this. They are Carol. They need to know someone sees them. If the story stayed with you, please share it, because the women who need to hear it won't find it unless you help it reach them. And if you are not subscribed to Fireside Tales yet, this is the moment. Every story we tell here is real and human and worth your time.